The lights died at Blackwell Grand 30 seconds before Damian Blackwell learned that his 8-year-old son had vanished. One moment, the private theater glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, while the most dangerous men on the East Coast negotiated in low voices over bourbon and territory. The next, darkness swallowed the room. The security doors locked automatically, and every phone on Damian's table lit up with the same message. Theo is not in his suite. Damian rose without touching the pistol beneath his jacket. He did not need to. 12 armed men were already moving before he spoke. Seal the building. Find my son. His voice was quiet, but chairs scraped back across the marble as if he had shouted. 3 floors below, Nora Bennett pushed a housekeeping cart through the service corridor behind the old stage, unaware that half the criminal underworld had just been trapped inside the hotel. At 32, Nora had learned that people rarely looked closely at a plus-size woman in a gray maid's uniform. Guests noticed her only when a glass needed clearing or a stain needed removing. Tonight, that invisibility let her hear something the security team missed, a child trying not to cry behind the locked prop room door. Nora stopped. The emergency lights cast the corridor in a dim red glow. On the other side of the door came a short breath, then another, each one tighter than the last. Theo? She asked softly. The breathing stopped. Heavy footsteps thundered around the corner. 6 of Damian's guards appeared, broad-shouldered men in black suits, followed by the hotel's security chief. Move away from the door, he ordered. We're opening it. Nora planted both hands on the handle. Not like this. The security chief stared at her as though the furniture had spoken. That is Mr. Blackwell's son. Then stop surrounding him like he's a threat. One guard reached for her shoulder. Nora turned the lock from her side and pulled the service key free, sealing herself between the men and the terrified boy. The corridor erupted with angry voices, but she ignored them. She lowered herself onto the carpet, leaving several feet between her body and the door. I'm not coming in, she told Theo. You don't have to come out. No answer. Nora listened to his uneven breathing and felt an old memory open inside her, gentle and painful. A small community music room. Rain against the windows. A woman named Claire sitting beside a frightened young Nora, singing about a blue lantern that stayed lit when every other light went dark. Nora had not sung the melody in years. She began quietly, her voice imperfect but steady. Outside the corridor, Damian arrived just as the first notes slipped beneath the door. Every guard fell silent. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes did. That song had never been recorded. Claire had written it for Theo, and she had taken its final verse to the grave. Nora reached the line about finding your way home when a second voice answered from inside the prop room, small, trembling, and perfectly on key. Theo sang the missing words. Damian Blackwell, a man who could silence an entire city with one phone call, stood motionless in the red emergency light as his son unlocked the door for a woman no one in the building had bothered to see. The prop room door opened 3 inches, and one gray eye appeared in the darkness. Nora did not move toward it. Theo Blackwell was small for 8, dressed in navy pajamas and clutching a tarnished brass lantern against his chest. His gaze passed over the guards, reached his father, and immediately dropped to the floor. Then he looked at Nora. You know the rest, he whispered. Before she could answer, Damian stepped forward. Theo recoiled so quickly that the door struck the wall. Nora lifted one hand. Give him space. Every man in the corridor turned toward her. Damian's expression hardened, but he stopped. For one long second, power and fear faced each other beneath the red emergency lights. Then Damian ordered everyone back 20 feet. Theo came out only after Nora promised no one would touch him. He walked beside her to the private elevator, never taking her hand, but keeping close enough for his sleeve to brush her uniform. When the doors closed behind father and son, Nora finally released the breath burning in her lungs. The hotel's security chief did not. Thank her. He took her service keys, accused her of obstructing an emergency response, and suspended her before the electricity returned. By sunrise, Nora was cleaning out her locker in the basement laundry room. Blackwell Grand had employed her for 14 months, yet her entire presence fit inside a canvas tote bag. Orthopedic insoles, 2 granola bars, a chipped travel mug, and a college brochure folded so many times the edges had gone soft. Two attendants watched from the linen table as Nora changed out of her uniform. "Imagine locking armed security out of a room," one murmured. "She probably wanted the boss to notice her." The other laughed. "Men like Damien Blackwell do not notice women built like that." Nora kept folding. At 5 feet 6 inches and nearly 260 pounds, she had spent most of her life being discussed as though her body had entered the room before she did. Guests left wet towels on the floor beside her shoes. Managers assigned her the heaviest carts because she looked strong, then criticized her for moving too slowly. People mistook softness for permission and silence for stupidity. They did not know she had once studied music education at Lakeview College. They did not know she had spent 2 years helping children use rhythm and song to manage fear before her mother's illness emptied the family savings and pulled Nora out of school. She had been 24 then. 8 years later, she was still telling herself she would return next semester. Nora placed the brochure in her bag and shut the locker. She would find another job. She would finish her degree. She would not become another temporary woman hired to absorb the grief of a wealthy family and disappear when they felt better. As she reached the employee exit, the elevator opened behind her. Damien Blackwell stood alone inside, immaculate in a black suit, his face unreadable after a sleepless night. "Miss Bennett," he said, "you are not leaving yet." Nora turned, tightening her grip on the tote. "Your security chief already made that decision." Damien's dark eyes settled on the college brochure protruding from her bag, then returned to her face. "My security chief does not make decisions about the woman who knows my dead wife's song." Damien led Nora to the top floor without another word. The elevator opened into a private office overlooking the gray Chicago skyline, where rain streaked the glass and men in dark suits waited beside a long walnut table. Maps of shipping routes covered one wall. 3 phones rested near Damien's chair, each marked with a different city. Nora understood immediately that Blackwell Grand was not merely a luxury hotel. It was the polished front door of an empire built on ports, freight contracts, political favors, and fear. Damien dismissed the men with a glance. They obeyed without hesitation, leaving Nora alone with a man who could make an entire room disappear by lowering his voice. "Sit," he said. Nora remained standing. "I have been sitting whenever powerful people tell me to for most of my life. You can ask your questions while I stand." Something flickered in his expression, not anger exactly, but surprise sharpened by exhaustion. Damien moved behind his desk and opened a thin file. Nora saw her own name, address, work history, and college records printed across the first page. "You studied music education at Lakeview College," he said. "You worked with a youth program called Harbor Lights. You left after your mother was diagnosed with heart failure. You have no criminal record, no known connection to my rivals, and no reason to know a song my wife never performed in public." Nora stared at the file. "How long did it take your people to build that?" 23 minutes. "That is not impressive. It is invasive." Damien closed the folder. "My son disappeared during a security failure while half the Eastern syndicates were inside this building. A stranger sang something private to him, and for the first time in 18 months, he opened a locked door willingly. In my world, coincidences are expensive. In mine, frightened children are not suspects." The air between them tightened. Damien walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Below them, security vehicles circled the block while employees were questioned in the lobby. He looked like a man entirely in control, but Nora noticed the untouched coffee, the faint crease in his collar, and the way his gaze kept drifting toward the private hallway leading to Theo's rooms. 12 nannies, Damien said at last. 3 child development specialists. 2 private tutors. Theo rejected every one of them. He stopped eating in the dining room. He stopped speaking to anyone outside this family. Last month, he climbed onto the roof above the East Wing because he thought he could see his mother's old apartment from there. His voice stayed level, but each sentence carried the weight of something he had never allowed himself to admit. "In 5 days, this hotel will host a memorial for Claire. My family expects Theo to attend. My allies expect to see stability. My enemies will be watching for weakness." Nora felt anger rise before fear could stop it. "He is 8 years old. He is not proof that your empire is stable." Damien turned slowly. No one spoke to him that way. She could see it in the silence that followed. "You believe I am using my son," he said. I believe you are trying to control his grief because you cannot control your own. For one dangerous second, Damien's face became unreadable. Then a small voice came through the office intercom. Dad. Damien crossed the room instantly and pressed the button. I am here. Theo hesitated. Is the singing lady still there? Damien looked at Nora, and for the first time, the most feared man in the city had no answer ready. Nora stepped closer to the desk. Tell him I am here, she said. But only if he wants me to be. Damien pressed the intercom button. She is here, Theo, but she will stay only if you want her to. Silence answered him, followed by the faint sound of fabric shifting against the receiver. I want her to finish the song, Theo said. Damien looked at Nora, but she shook her head before he could issue another command. Not yet, she said. He opened the door once. That does not mean we push him through every feeling before breakfast. Damien released the button. Give us 10 minutes, son. He led Nora into a smaller sitting room adjoining the office, where framed photographs covered one wall. Claire appeared in nearly all of them, elegant and bright beside a younger Damien, then kneeling beside Theo beneath summer trees. Nora stopped before a photograph taken outside a brick community center. Claire wore jeans, a blue sweater, and a paper name tag that read Claire Evans. Nora felt the past settle into place. That was her, she whispered. She volunteered at Harbor Lights before she married you, or before anyone there knew who she was. Damien studied Nora instead of the photograph. Tell me everything. Nora remembered a rainy Thursday 8 years earlier, when her mother had collapsed during a rehearsal and an ambulance had taken her away. Nora had been 24, terrified, and unable to breathe. Claire had found her sitting behind the piano, pressed a cup of water into her hands, and sung a simple melody about a lantern shining through a storm. She said she wrote it for frightened children, Nora explained. She taught me the first verse and the chorus. I never heard the ending until Theo sang it last night. Damien's jaw tightened. Claire wrote that final verse after Theo was born. Then she must have carried the beginning with her for years. The answer did not ease his suspicion, but it changed its shape. Damien crossed to a cabinet, removed a checkbook, and placed it on the table. Name your price. Stay through the memorial. Work with Theo. Whatever you earn here, I will multiply it. Nora stared at the blank check. You think money makes this simple because money makes most things obey you. Money provides security. It also lets powerful people avoid asking whether someone wants what they are buying. Damien's eyes darkened. My son asked for you. Your son asked me to finish a song. He did not hire me as his new mother, his therapist, or his proof of stability. She pushed the checkbook back toward him. I am not qualified to treat trauma, and I will not pretend otherwise. I will speak with Theo if he chooses to speak with me, but his therapist stays involved. No hidden cameras in the room. No guards standing close enough to make him feel trapped. No one orders him to perform at that memorial. And nobody removes another photograph, record, or piece of clothing that belonged to Claire without asking him. Damien's expression became dangerously still. You are setting rules in my house. I am setting the conditions under which I will enter your son's grief. For several seconds, the only sound was rain against the windows. Damien could have ended her career with one call. He could have made the check large enough to erase every debt she carried. Instead, he closed the checkbook. You will remain a hotel employee, he said. Your regular duties continue. Theo chooses when to approach you. Dr. Elaine Porter will supervise anything related to his care. Nora held his gaze. And the memorial? Damien looked toward the photograph of Claire in her blue sweater. Theo decides. It was not surrender, but for a man who ruled through certainty, it was the first honest concession he had made in years. By the second evening, Nora understood that Theo did not fear silence. He used it. Silence was the only room in Blackwell Grand that no adult could enter without his permission. So Nora stopped asking him questions. She returned to her regular shift, pushing her cart through the East Wing while the hotel prepared for Claire's memorial. Florists carried white roses into the ballroom. Security teams tested doors and cameras. Men with expensive watches discussed seating arrangements as though grief could be organized on a chart. Nora worked as if Theo were not watching from the upper landing, even when she knew he was there. She began building what she called a sound map of the old theater. One soft tap of her broom meant the backstage hallway was clear. 2 taps meant someone else was nearby. A low note hummed beside the costume room. A higher one marked the stairs leading toward the rehearsal studio. She left small cards near safe places, each printed with a simple choice: stay, leave, listen, or talk. Dr. Elaine Porter approved the idea because it gave Theo control without demanding speech. Damien approved nothing aloud, but Nora noticed that the guards began standing farther from the doors. On the third night, Theo appeared beside her cart while she polished the brass rail outside the balcony. He did not greet her. He placed a photograph on the velvet seat between them. Claire stood at a piano, laughing, while a much younger Theo pressed both hands against the keys. "They took this away," he said. Nora set down her cloth. "Who did?" "The first nanny put all Mom's pictures in boxes. She said Dad wanted the house to feel normal again." Theo's voice remained flat, but his fingers tightened around the photograph. "The second one locked the music room because I stayed there too long. Another one said I had to stop asking what Mom would do. She said it made Dad sad." Nora felt the truth settle heavily inside her. "So when a new nanny came, you thought she was there to erase something else?" Theo nodded. "If I liked them, they would think I did not need Mom anymore." Nora sat on the floor, leaving enough space for him to walk away. Liking someone new does not remove someone you love. Hearts are not hotel rooms, Theo. Nobody has to check out before another person is allowed inside. His eyes lifted to hers. "Are you trying to be my new mom?" "No," Nora answered without hesitation. "I am Nora. That is the only person I know how to be." Behind the partially opened balcony door, Damien stood unseen. He had come to call Theo to dinner, but the words died before reaching his mouth. Every photograph had been removed on his orders. Every dress, record, and book had been packed away because seeing Claire's belongings made breathing feel impossible. He had told himself he was protecting his son from pain. Instead, he had taught Theo that loving his mother was dangerous. Nora glanced toward the doorway. She had known Damien was there from the moment his shadow crossed the carpet. "Your father should hear this from you when you are ready," she told Theo. "Not from me." Theo looked at the door, then placed the photograph on the seat beside him. He did not call Damien inside. Damien did not force the moment. For the first time in his life, the man who controlled every entrance in the building remained outside a door because his son had not invited him through it. The following afternoon, Nora found the music room unlocked for the first time in 18 months. Dust covered the black piano, pale. Rectangles marked the places where photographs had once stood, and heavy curtains kept the Chicago daylight from reaching the floor. Damien waited in the doorway while Theo remained somewhere beyond the adjoining hall. "I gave the order to clear this room," Damien said. "I thought fewer reminders would make it easier for him." Nora pulled back one curtain, letting a narrow blade of light cross the piano. "Easier for whom?" Damien did not answer. Nora began sorting the abandoned music books while he watched from a distance. Beneath the padded piano bench, her fingers touched a loose strip of fabric. She lifted the cushion and discovered a folded sheet of music tied with a faded blue ribbon. The first page carried Claire's handwriting and the title of the melody Nora had sung during the blackout. Inside the final page rested a sealed envelope addressed to Damien. His name was written with such tenderness that the sight of it changed his face. He crossed the room immediately. "Give it to me." Nora held the envelope against the music. "Not yet." The temperature seemed to drop. "That letter belongs to me." Then receive it as the man she trusted, not as the man who believes everything can be taken by command. Damien stepped closer, his presence filling the room with quiet danger. Nora felt the instinct to retreat, but she remained beside the piano. "You have no right to judge what existed between my wife and me," he said. "I am judging what is happening between you and your son." His eyes hardened. Nora continued before fear could silence her. "Theo has spent a year watching adults remove every piece of his mother. Then tell him it was for his own good. If you seize this letter from my hand, you prove that nothing has changed. Sit outside the door. Let him decide whether you come in." Damien stared at her as though no one had ever asked him to surrender control without offering defeat in return. "And if he does not call me, then you wait." The answer struck deeper than defiance. Waiting meant accepting that love did not guarantee access. Damien looked toward the hallway where his son remained hidden, then slowly stepped out of the room. Nora placed the envelope on the piano and sat several feet away. Theo appeared 10 minutes later, holding the photograph of Claire. He saw the music, then the letter, and his eyes filled with recognition. "Mom hid things in the bench," he said. Nora nodded. "Your father is outside." Theo looked toward the closed door. "Is he angry?" "He is trying not to be afraid." Theo studied the envelope, then opened the door himself. Damien sat on the hallway floor in his tailored black suit, his back against the wall, waiting exactly where Nora had told him to wait. Theo did not invite him inside immediately. He sat beside his father and placed the photograph between them. Minutes passed before Theo whispered, "You can come in, but you cannot put everything away again." Damien's voice was rougher than Nora had ever heard it. "I will not." Inside the music room, Theo opened Claire's sheet music and began the first line. Damien tried to follow, but the words failed him. He looked toward Nora. She did not rescue him from the silence. Instead, she waited until Theo repeated the line, slower this time, giving his father the chance to learn it. Damien sang the words badly, quietly, and without authority. Theo corrected him. Damien listened. Only then did Nora place Claire's unopened letter into his hands. Damien read Claire's letter alone before dawn, but the words followed him into the conference room the next morning. She had not accused him of failing as a husband or father. That would have been easier to endure. She had asked him not to teach Theo that strength meant hiding every wound until no one could reach him. Across the walnut table, 6 members of the Blackwell family council discussed the memorial as though Claire's life were a business asset. They wanted Theo on stage beneath the chandeliers, Damien at his side, and Nora close enough for the cameras to capture the child reaching toward her. "The public will see recovery," said Margaret Blackwell, Damien's aunt. "Our allies will see stability. The woman can sing the song, calm the boy, and leave before the private reception." Nora stood near the door in her housekeeping uniform, summoned without being told why. Damien had expected her to object to the cameras or demand additional pay. Instead, she looked at Theo's proposed schedule, then placed it carefully on the table. "Did anyone ask him whether he wants to do this?" Margaret gave a thin smile. "Children do not make decisions about family obligations. Grieving children should make decisions about how their grief is displayed." One of the councilmen glanced at Nora's broad figure and plain shoes with open contempt. "You are an employee, Miss Bennett. Your task is to make the boy cooperative." Damien's jaw tightened, but Nora answered before he could. "That has never been my task." She turned to him. "You agreed that Theo would choose. Was that agreement real, or was it only useful while he was quiet?" Damien felt every eye in the room waiting for him to restore the natural order, to remind the maid who held the power. 2 days earlier, he might have done exactly that. "The memorial protects more than our reputation," he said. "There are alliances tied to this event. If Theo appears calm, certain people will think twice before testing this family." Nora's expression changed, not into fear, but disappointment. "Then you are still asking an 8-year-old to carry the weight of your empire." She removed her hotel identification card and set it beside the schedule. "I will not stand next to him so powerful adults can pretend he is healed on command. I will not teach him that he has choices and then help you take them away." Damien rose. The council fell silent. He could have ordered security to stop her. He could have offered enough money to rescue her from every debt and delay. Instead, he watched Nora walk out because keeping her by force would prove she had been right about him. That evening, Theo entered Damien's office without knocking. He carried Claire's sheet music under one arm. "I heard Aunt Margaret," he said. Damien closed the file before him. "You do not have to attend." Theo looked surprised. "I want to go." Damien waited. "But I choose the song. Nora does not pretend to be mom. Nobody tells her where to stand. And you have to sing with me." Damien had faced prosecutors, rivals, and men who wanted his empire broken apart. Nothing had frightened him like the simple request in his son's voice. "I do not sing well," he admitted. Theo placed the music on the desk. "Neither did you yesterday." A laugh nearly escaped Damien before grief caught it. He looked at Claire's handwriting, then at the son he had tried to protect by making every decision for him. "All right," he said. "We do it your way." Theo nodded once. "Then you have to ask Nora to come back." Damien stared at the empty place where her identification card still rested. For the first time, he understood that an apology was not another kind of command. It was a door he had to stand outside until Nora chose whether to open it. The fire alarm began during the first note of Theo's song. 2 hours earlier, Nora had entered Blackwell Grand through the front doors for the first time, not through the employee entrance. She had returned only after Damien came to her apartment without guards, apologized without excuses, and promised that Theo would control his own part in the memorial. Now nearly 400 guests filled the restored theater beneath crystal chandeliers and dark blue velvet balconies. Theo stood at center stage with Claire's sheet music in his hands. Damien waited beside him, rigid in a black suit, while Nora remained near the wings because Theo had chosen where everyone would stand. Then the lights failed. A mechanical voice ordered an immediate evacuation, and red emergency lamps flooded the aisles. Guests rose in confusion. Security officers moved toward the stage, but Nora noticed something wrong before Damien's men did. The illuminated exit arrows pointed toward the west service corridor, a route that housekeeping staff had been warned never to use during a fire because it passed beneath an old ventilation chamber. Blackwell Grand's emergency plan directed guests east. Someone had reversed the signs. A man wearing a security jacket reached Theo first. "This way," he said, placing a hand near the boy's shoulder. Theo froze. Nora saw that the man's identification badge carried the wrong color stripe. "Theo, stay where you are," she called. The stranger turned, and the calm mask on his face disappeared. Damien stepped forward, but a surge of frightened guests blocked the aisle between him and the stage. The false guard seized Theo's arm and pulled him behind the curtain. Nora followed through the wings, not because she believed herself invincible, but because she knew every narrow passage, laundry stairwell, and fire door in the building. She found Theo near the west corridor, struggling to breathe while the stranger tried to force open a locked exit. Nora struck the fire door release with her palm. A steel partition dropped between the man and the child, sealing him on the opposite side without violence. She pulled Theo into a maintenance hallway and locked the secondary door. Darkness surrounded them. Theo's breaths came fast and shallow. "They are going to take me," he whispered. "Not tonight," Nora said, though fear pressed hard against her ribs. She lifted a housekeeping radio from the wall and gave Damien's security team the corridor number. Static answered. The signal was being blocked. Somewhere beyond the steel door, metal shook under repeated impacts. Nora could not overpower the person outside, and she could not promise help would arrive in time. What she could do was keep Theo from disappearing inside his fear. She began the first line of Claire's melody. Theo shook his head. "I cannot." "You do not have to sound brave," Nora told him. "You only have to breathe long enough to sing the next word." He tried once and failed. Nora repeated the line more slowly. This time, Theo answered. Their voices traveled through the old ventilation shaft and reached the stage microphones, which remained connected to an emergency battery. In the theater, Damien heard his son singing through the speakers. He closed his eyes for 1 second, recognized the echo pattern from the West Maintenance Wing, and ordered his men away from the false evacuation route. For once, he did not charge ahead or ignore Nora's plan. He trusted what she knew. Minutes later, the Real security team reached the corridor from the service stairs. The false guard was detained, and Theo was brought safely back toward the stage. When Damien saw his son, he stopped several feet away and waited. Theo crossed the distance himself. Then he reached back for Nora, linking the three of them by choice as the alarm finally fell silent. The memorial never resumed that night. Guests were escorted out through the correct exits while Damien's security team uncovered the plan behind the false alarm. The captured man had been hired by a rival who believed Theo was the easiest way to force Damien into surrendering control of the eastern shipping routes. Yet the attempt failed because the people behind it had made the same mistake as everyone else. They had assumed Nora was only a heavy-set maid. Theo was only a frightened child, and Damien was only a man who answered fear with force. Instead, Nora had recognized the altered evacuation route. Theo had used his mother's song to stay present, and Damien had trusted someone else's judgment when every instinct told him to seize control. 3 months later, the old theater at Blackwell Grand opened its doors again. The blue velvet curtains had been restored, the damaged exit signs replaced, and the abandoned rehearsal rooms transformed into classrooms for children living with grief, anxiety, and family trauma. Nora agreed to direct the program only after Damien placed it under an independent board and signed documents guaranteeing that no Blackwell family member could interfere with its professional decisions. He also arranged her work schedule so she could return to Lakeview College. But Nora accepted no gift she had not negotiated for herself. She completed her enrollment with money she had saved, supported by a salary she had earned, not a debt she owed. At the opening ceremony, reporters filled the first rows while hotel executives, community leaders, and members of Damien's world gathered beneath the chandeliers. Margaret Blackwell approached the microphone and introduced Nora as the former maid who had saved Damien Blackwell's son. Damien stepped forward before Nora could respond. The room fell silent. "Her name is Nora Bennett," he said. "She is the founder and director of this program. Her decisions here belong to her, and no one speaks of her as though her value began when my family noticed it." Nora met his eyes across the stage. There was no possession in his expression, no command disguised as praise. There was recognition. Theo then walked into the light, carrying the tarnished brass lantern he had held during the blackout. At center stage stood 3 chairs. He placed Claire's photograph on the middle one and sat at the piano. Nora remained near the curtains until he looked toward her and nodded. Damien stood on Theo's other side, visibly uncomfortable beneath the attention of hundreds of people. Theo played the opening notes. His hands trembled, but he did not stop. He sang the first verse alone. Damien joined during the second, still slightly off-key, exactly as he had been in the music room. Theo smiled and corrected him without fear. Nora entered only for the final chorus, because Theo had chosen the moment. Claire's place remained empty, honored rather than replaced. When the song ended, the audience rose, but Theo did not look at them. He looked at his father. Damien knelt beside the piano, not as a crime lord before his heir, but as a father willing to be seen without armor. "I should never have made you hide her, because I could not bear to remember," he said. "I am sorry." Theo touched the brass lantern. "We can remember together." Later, after the theater emptied, Damien found Nora standing alone beneath the stage lights. He did not tell her she belonged with him. He did not offer a mansion, a title, or protection as payment for love. He simply asked whether she would join him and Theo for dinner. Nora studied the man who had once believed control was the same as care. Then she looked toward Theo, waiting by the aisle without pulling her hand or making the choice for her. Nora picked up her coat and stepped toward them because she wanted to, carrying her own future with her. If you were Nora, would you risk opening your heart to a powerful man only after he proved he could respect your freedom, or would you walk away to protect the life you rebuilt? Share your choice in the comments. Tell us which city or country you are watching from, and subscribe to hear more stories about women who are finally seen without surrendering who they are.